Thank you, and it is wonderful to see all these folks from different churches in not just the Austin area, but we've got some pastors here from the Valley even, and some from Northern Michigan, and all sorts of things. So it's incredible. I do want to also acknowledge that Bishop Wilson and Zoe Wilson are here. Welcome, glad to have you. And just a brief word, because you're not here to hear me at all. We want to hear Bishop Talbert. I drove to Birmingham for that incredible wedding that he did, and was an observer, an active observer, up close, and watched him be a pastor to Joe and Bobby. And with all the limelight that was going on in the rehearsal, Bishop Talbert became Pastor Talbert and did what you do in a rehearsal, and even reminded us before the wedding that in spite of everything that's going on, let's remember that this is a wedding between these two men. And that moved me, because we were seeing up close his pastoral heart. And I think that even though he's known as an activist, that pastoral heart is what has guided him and gives him the integrity and the authenticity that we all yearn for. And for that, he is an incredible example. He is a celebrity of sorts, but he's not doing this for celebrity. He's on the circuit because he is called, and he is called for doing justice and sharing inclusiveness and love in our beloved church, which is a mess. But we're glad in the midst of this mess, we have Bishop Melvin Talbert. Bishop Talbert. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to greet each of you in the name and in the spirit of Jesus Christ. Thank you for inviting me to come over and have a few words with you. I think I'll just begin with that wedding. I really don't know many times why things happen for me and to me. By personality type, I'm an introvert. I don't like controversy, you know, but it seems as though the stuff keeps falling on my plate. And when it does, I feel that I got to do something about it. My mom and dad taught me that. I'll never forget growing up as a kid. My dad had this saying, "Boy, your word is your bond." We were poor sharecroppers, and we didn't have any money, and I learned later what Dad was trying to tell me. If you get in trouble, we don't have any money to bail you out, but if you have a word that is trustworthy, it'll get you bond, it'll get you out. And I've kind of lived with that. That's been a part of my journey. I didn't just perform that wedding in Center Point, Alabama, because I wanted the limelight. As I said, I'm an introvert and I don't like the public. But I was there because I had no other choice. You see, it was back in 1960 when I was in seminary, when as a student I was the president of the student body. And it was in the midst of the turmoil in the South over the Jim Crow laws. And students had decided that our parents have been trying to bring a solution to this separate but equal situation for a long time, and it's time for we as students to see if we can make a difference. And I'll never forget some of those conversations, and we had to finally come to the conclusion that it was not realistic for us to expect our parents to do it, because they were so intricately tied to the system for their survival and to put bread on our tables that they couldn't afford to do it. And so as students, we had to think about that and to say, now, what is it that we can do? And we finally said, what we have to offer is simply our lives. And so those of us who sat in at counters, lunch counters, and said we would not leave and would not get up if requested to leave, but we'd be prepared to go to jail, we said, this we must do, even if it means losing our lives. And this is what we can offer for the sake of future generations. So it's out of that spirit that I come to this situation, and what I have had to learn is that discrimination is discrimination no matter where you see it.
Amen.
There is no distinction between being discriminated against because of the color of your skin than being discriminated against because of your sexual orientation. It's one and the same. And the struggle that I've had to face, even as a person of color, is I've had to struggle with my black sisters and brothers, because there are some who say, well, there is a difference. There is no similarity, because we have nothing to do with the color of our skin, but because of the sexuality issue, that's a choice. Well, you and I know better. Folk who are gay and lesbian and bisexual, transgender, are not that way by choice. They are not fools. They don't intentionally invite and heap that kind of discrimination and isolation upon themselves. They are the way they are because God created them that way. And if God created them that way, who are we to decide that we can draw the line in the sand? There's only one person or one being who can do that, and that's God. We are called to do one thing: love God, love neighbor. So that's somewhat of the journey that brought me to Alabama. When I made the statement at the 2012 General Conference declaring that the laws and words of derogatory language in the book of discipline was wrong, immoral, and unjust, and no longer deserved our loyalty and obedience, it was coming out of my background of acting in defiance of the Jim Crow laws back in the 60s. Those laws of racial segregation were immoral and wrong. The laws in our book of discipline calling for the derogatory expressions about people who are lesbian and gay, and taking specific actions to prohibit clergy from being in full ministry to LGBTQ persons. That likewise is immoral, it is unjust, and it's oppressive. And as I have said earlier today, go to page 34 in your hymnal and look at the baptismal covenant that we've all gone through. At some point, a pastor read to all of you one of the questions pertaining to baptism, and it said, will you resist evil, oppression, and all of these acts against other human beings in whatever form they show themselves? And you answered, I do. So biblical obedience that I'm a part of across the church is simply calling us to be faithful to our baptism. Resist those things that are evil and unjust, and choose to do the right thing. So I did the wedding in Alabama because when I made that statement at the 2012 General Conference, I concluded it by saying, and by the way, if the opportunity presents itself, I will do a same-gender marriage. Now, at that time, I had no idea, and I thought I was pretty safe in Nashville, Tennessee, because I grew up, all of my ministry was on the West Coast. It would be pretty hard for me to get from the West Coast, from Nashville to the West Coast to do a wedding. But lo and behold, God has a way of I had this call. Well, first of all, I don't know how many of you know Laura Rossberg. She is one of those new staff members of RMN who's been assigned to the Southeast jurisdiction to do work among the churches there and leaders around this issue. Well, as soon as she was named, I sent her an email and I said, Lauren, welcome to the Southeast, and if there's anything that I can do to be of assistance to you, you just let me know. And I said, I'd like to sit down and talk to you sometime. And so I invited her over to my house, you know, being very hospitable. And we sat out on the sun porch and we talked and had a good time. And as she was getting ready to leave, she said, there are a couple other things that I want to ask you. And we talked about one of them, and I don't remember what that first one was, because when she lowered the boom on me, I said, whoosh. She is the one who made the connection between me and the couple in Centerport, Alabama, because they were looking for someone. They had gone to their pastor. Their pastor refused to even counsel them, but she referred them to a former pastor, and he did agree to counsel them. The former pastor was at the General Conference when I made my statement. And so he said to the couple, he said, if necessary, I will do it, but I think I know someone else that's even better than I could possibly do it. And he made the connection with Laura, who then was sitting at my house and put the invitation out to me. Making a long story short, I said, okay, I'll give it consideration, but I have to meet the couple because I expect all people preparing for marriage to go through certain formal processes in order to be married. And I can't say yes until that has been satisfied for me. And so we had a chance to meet at the last meeting, a gathering in Washington, D.C. They were there, we talked, and I discovered that this pastor had indeed counseled them, and I realized that they were longtime members of our church. And the only reason why they could not be married in their own church, in their own community, by their own pastor, is because they were both gay. No other reason. They were strong, staunch United Methodist ministers, United Methodist layperson. But the only reason is because they were gay. And when I discovered that, I said, by all means. But then I said to them, now, in order for me to have integrity in this process, you must not talk to anybody about this decision of mine until I have a chance to talk with my colleague bishop. And I said, you can't send out the invitations, anything, until I tell you I've made this contact. And so I called my bishop, colleague bishop, and we had a conversation, and I told her what I was planning to do. Of course, she was shocked, and she called me back later, and then she asked me not to do it. And when she asked me not to do it, I had to say to her, I'm very sorry. I feel that I must do it, and here's why. And I told her my story. And so I said, so there will be a wedding in Birmingham on August 26th. So that's a bit of that. But it was done because I believe deep down in my heart that I did the right thing. No more than what should be happening across our church. And when I decided at General Conference that the time had come to name the issue and to say that our church's position is wrong and it should no longer be embraced and upheld, but it should be challenged and resisted, I think it's time for us to do the right thing. And let me just say to you, that was very painful for me to do at General Conference. It was very painful because I love my church, in spite of its long history. You know, my church, back in 1939, set my folk apart. They said, you're not quite full of human yet. We can't even worship with you on Sunday morning. We're going to have to create a separate jurisdiction across the connection and put all of you black folk together with your own black bishop. You know, you can't even worship with us. And so we had churches right across the street from us, from each other, across the country, one white, one black. But yet, those of us who were in it decided that this is our church as much as it is yours. And when we merged and did away with the central jurisdiction in 1968, some of us at that time had to decide, do we stay or do we go? And some of us decided, we're going to stay. And there are historic reasons why we stay. As far as we know it's a fact. In the very first General Conference of the Methodist people in America, black folk were there. It's our church as much as it is anybody else's. And I will not let anyone tell me differently. So I'm in for the long haul, and I intend to be around. And I think what I did in Alabama was right, and it was correct. I'm excited to report that the biblical obedience movement emerging across the church is alive and well. Everywhere I go, people are excited, they're open, and they're ready to go. And what's going to keep that movement going would be people like you who are committed to doing the right thing. That's all it's about. Let me just share with you this story. After I did the wedding in Alabama, I made the front page of the Tennessean. That's the largest paper in Tennessee. I was on the front page. I got an email from a lady in a little country town right outside of Nashville. And she said in the email, "You don't know me, and I don't know you personally, but I want to tell you what happened." She said, "I have a 13-year-old son. I had discovered something was going on in his life, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I was worried about it, worried about him. But when he saw your picture in the paper and what you had to say about gay people, he made the decision to come out to us." This is a mother, and she's talking about she and her husband. And she said, and when he came out to us, we accepted him, we embraced him, and now he is the happiest person that I have ever known. He has friends, and they all know his sexuality, but that makes no difference. He has more friends now than ever. And she said, "What I really wanted to say to you is, I was so worried about him because I didn't know whether he was into or would end up going into drugs and maybe killing himself. I was just worried about him. But I want to say to you, I think you saved my son's life." My sisters and brothers, that one statement alone is enough for me to say what I have done is right. It is about saving lives. It is about saving lives. And even our book of discipline has some good statements in it about our churches are called to be in ministry to and with all persons. And it also specifically says, parents, do not disown your gay and lesbian children. Embrace them. Now that's our own book of discipline. But there's another section of the discipline that seems to get all of the attention. So let's treat the book of discipline like most of you treat the Bible. Let's pick those good things and embrace them. And let's choose to do the right thing. I think that's enough for me to get the discussion on the floor. And I see this gentleman right here. Yes.
I have two sons, one 37.
Would you stand and answer the person because everybody needs to?
Al Lindsay, St. John's Methodist. I have two sons, 37 and 40. This is not an issue for young people. They don't understand why this is a big deal. So he's gay, so she's lesbian. So what? So what should we do as older people, as lay persons? What's our next step?
You know, let me just, your point is well taken. It's a good one. A year ago, I thought I was going to be doing something great. I said, well, I'm involved in all of this controversy that's going on. I have a granddaughter who is now 16, but then she was 15. And I said, I better talk to her to let her know what I'm doing. And I started telling her about what I was involved in and all of that, just to kind of prepare her so that she, when she started getting all of this information about a Popeye, that I'm still okay, you know. And she looked at me and she said, "Papa, the church is talking about my friends." And your point is well taken. And then rather than being concerned about what she was going to be thinking about me, I started being concerned about her. And I raised the question to myself and to my wife. I said, whoa, our granddaughter's going to be going off to college in 2 years. Will she invite her friends to be in the United Methodist Church? Or will she go with her friends to some other place or to no place? My sisters and brothers, it's a life and death situation for our church as well. I see our church on a big decline. You know, it's on a steep decline in this country. And our young people, as you say, they've gotten beyond this issue. They've gotten beyond it. They want to know, what's wrong with you people? What's wrong? What's wrong with you? You know, they've just gone on with it. And it's time for us to do likewise. It's time for us to get this chapter behind us. But until we deal with this issue in our church, we will not see, in my understanding, any significant growth. The churches that I see across this connection that are growing now, we have some of the churches that are on the far right. You know, some of those are growing, and you have to understand that. But the church that are growing with integrity in our denomination are open, welcoming, and affirming congregations. And they are really happening across the world.
To the novice that don't understand the every 4 years conference issue, and what happened in 2012 about agreeing that we could only disagree or what have you, could you give a brief Cliff Notes edition of what was discussed, how we landed as a church, and what we can do as members of the church to push forward the movement?
Right. I was there at that general conference, and I went like many with the hope that this might be the year that we would get rid of that derogatory language and discriminatory language in the book of history. But it's not, well, I just say it the way it is. Our church is captured by the political right at this point. And they were not open to making any compromise with anybody. So after the General Conference voted to not remove that discriminatory language, two of our great pastors across the church, Slaughter and Adams, decided that they would put an opportunity before the General Conference to at least say where we are and what they were calling for, not an endorsement of either side, but they were simply saying, can we agree to disagree and then move ahead and be the church at work, or something like that. I don't remember the specific details. And that motion failed. And when that motion failed, that was the deep turning part in my soul, turning point in my soul. And I had to say, I can no longer embrace the stance of my church that I love dearly. It's time for me to say and speak out. And I intended to do what I did and to use my role as a bishop to do that. And that's what I did. Yeah.
Bishop, I'm Jay Brim from Westlake United Methodist Church, and I've attended General Conference a number of times. Probably the biggest blocking entity to moving forward are the African delegates. Is there a strategy to help Africa understand this issue?
Yeah, well, RMN has intentionally deployed a staff person to be working with the central conferences, in particular the Afro-Central conferences. Let us not quickly put the blame on Africa. I know because I was at General Conference. Sisters and brothers from the Southeast intentionally put themselves right behind the African delegates and prompted them, and in some cases encouraged them, and in other cases threatened them to vote a certain way. I believe that those political people from the Southeast will live to regret manipulating that process, because once our African sisters and brothers finally realize the power that they have, I think they're going to say to our sisters and brothers, no longer will you tell us what to think and what to do. And I think that day is coming. That day of reckoning is coming. But even now, there are churches in the United Methodist Church who are relating to Africa, and they are still supporting the colonial understanding of the gospel and faith to churches in Africa. And in the situation in Nigeria, they are participating in the atrocities that are going on there of beating and, in some instances, killing people who are gay and lesbian and transgender and bisexual, right? So our church has a lot in its history that we have to repent of. And one day we will have to reckon that. We reckon for that action on my part. Yes.
My name is Mindy. I'm from here in Austin. In 1976, my church was burned to the ground because homosexual people were allowed to worship there. And throughout my life, I have experienced the beatings. My friends have died of diseases that were called immoral diseases. It has been a long road. I'm now married. I got to file my income tax married. I'd just like to say thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Keep it up.
Well, when I retired, I never looked back. I do have some colleague bishops who, when they retire, they lament not having the reins. I've not needed those. But I've had my ups and downs. I've had some serious health challenges. I didn't think I was going to live at the end of 2006 and into 2007. I literally thought that I died, but that was okay. So I've had to come back. But in my process of coming back and being who I am today, it's one group that reached out to me, and that's the LGBTQ community. They did so when I first reached out to them. I was at home recuperating, and I heard about this meeting of clergy at Minneapolis at the Independent Avenue Church. And I said, that sounds like a meeting that I want to go to. And I was under the care of a psychiatrist and a psychologist. I was in deep trouble. And I had to talk to them about it. And because they had to nurture me back. They had to help me feel my way back into being who I am now, because I was having difficulty just coping. And so I called and asked if it would be okay for me to come to the meeting in Minneapolis. And after checking with Bruce Robbins, a longtime friend, and with Troy Plummer, who was the executive director of RMN, they both checked around and they said, okay, you know, you can come. And the reason I checked it is because I realized that I'm a bishop of a church. And I realized that when I show up at some place, I can have a negative or a positive impact. And so what I didn't want to do was to go to that meeting in Minneapolis of the clergy who are now a part of the Altar for All movement and to put a damper on it. I just wanted to go and to be a part of it because I thought it was something that really made sense to me. And so I went to that meeting, and it was a life-giving experience. I felt affirmed, and even though the psychiatrists and psychologists had said, well, you can't speak, you just, well, they invited me to say something, and I did something anyway. But to make it long story short, that movement then led to RMN and Troy Plummer inviting me to become a part of the board of RMN. And after struggling with that, I finally said yes. And it's one of the best decisions that I've made in my life, because now when I go to groups like RMN and to places like I'm in today, I feel more at home than I do in just the regular run-of-the-mill church. Why? Because I know that the people there are open and welcoming to all. And that feels like home to me. That feels like home to me. And so it's not just because of this journey that I'm on that I'm here today, but I'm here because I am you. We belong to each other. And I think God is calling us to do something great that we don't know. And I think we got to open ourselves to that future and just let it unfold. I'm excited about the emerging movement that I experience, and I think we haven't seen it all yet.
Virgin Glenn, I'm retired clergy from St. John's. When I heard what Bishop Talbert had done, the offer that she had made to Frank Talbert, and then almost in the same couple of weeks, read about a statement that Bishop Jones had made to a group of clergy saying that if there were 100 clergy who did same-sex weddings, that there would be 100 trials and spend whatever money it took to do that. So I wonder, these kinds of public statements and actions of bishops, what kind, and the impact that they can have on both either encouraging freedom and also freezing and encouraging fear. What kind of conversations, I know it's a confidential relationship that you have with others in the Council of Bishops, but to the best that you can share, what kinds of conversations are going on in the Council of Bishops that give us some hope in terms of those kinds of conversations?
Yeah. Now let me just kind of put a box around myself at this point. You know, the Council of Bishops asked that a complaint be filed against me by the president and the bishop in Alabama. I've had my meeting with the bishop and the president, and the purpose of that meeting was to deal with possible resolution. And all I can say to you at this time is that there was no resolution, because I could not in clear conscience do what they asked me to do. They asked me to do two things. First of all, to make a public apology to my colleague bishop in Alabama and to the whole Council of Bishops for undermining the ministry of the Council of Bishops. And secondly, not to do another wedding. And I said, I don't have to think about that. I will not make that commitment, and there is no apology. I've done what I've done, and I believe I've done the right thing. And so that ended the meeting. And now where that is in that land where we don't talk about it until it happens. Yeah, so that part of it, that's where that is. When you talk about what Bishop Cacanio did, Bishop Cacanio is acting out of the depths of his heart and soul and commitment, and I believe they will work out an agreement. All that's left is for Frank to make a decision as to whether or not he wants to do that. That means moving his entire family across the country, and that's not easy to do. But if he chooses to do that, that will happen, and it'll be a good ministry. We got all of the details of what you have to work out in that. It's clear that he has been defrocked. It's clear that he doesn't have orders per se, and so all of the things about how do you do that will need to be worked out. Fortunately, I had already pioneered what you do because in my conference up in the Pacific Northwest, in those little struggling churches that couldn't afford pastors who were full-time, my cabinet and I just said, we're going to put out an order across, a call across the church to layfolk who have retired early and want to do an exciting ministry for a number of years. We said 3 to 5 years at no pay. All we'll do is give you expenses. And we had more than we could use. But the positive thing is that they took those little churches and they started growing. They didn't know any better. They just did. They just did what they needed to do. And so they don't have to think long and hard about that. Just take that person and assign them as a lay person to that congregation and give them a license to preach, and boom, you're in business. Yeah. So that'll happen. That'll happen. And I guess then the final thing is that in the last Council of Bishops meeting, they did have a pretty difficult struggle talking about the issue that was around me. And at one point, some of my colleagues wanted to have the council vote that those who disagreed with the position of the council could have their name publicly attached to the notice that went out. Well, unfortunately, the council took the position that they refused to vote that. So they left the colleague bishops with no choice but to speak their minds. And so what you have in what's happening between Bishop Cacanio on one hand and Bishop Scott Jones on the other are individual colleagues simply speaking out. So we want unity, but when we don't allow for free expression, we will never have unity.
Bishop, I've got a question.
Yes.
I think that there's a tendency to look at people like Frank Schaefer, you, Amy DeLong, and others as people who live in parts of the country or have positions of retirement or whatever, and we can't do that here.
Mm-hmm.
But there are things we can do.
Yes.
What can we do?
Yeah. You can do what you're doing right here. That's what biblical obedience is all about. You know, I just decided that, and RMN now has adopted biblical obedience as the frame through which all of the ministry of RMN will be doing for the foreseeable future. And what that is, it's moving away from the style of saying that we're going to put all of our eggs in the basket of changing legislation. It says we're going to put a big focus on local development, emerging leadership of laity and clergy at the local level. And we're calling on pastors and congregations, in my language, to do the right thing, to take look at the legislation in the discipline and choose intentionally to ignore it and to do the right thing, and to do it based on your own conscience. And I think that's at the heart of the biblical obedience movement that's emerging across the denomination, is people are looking at it and saying, you know, that's wrong. And we should no longer stand behind these unjust laws. We should choose to do the right thing. And so that's what I'm encouraging you to do. Now, I don't ask you to do that without taking a look at the consequences. There are possible consequences, and you're seeing it play itself out.